We're at Harvard University in William James Hall in the office of Steven Pinker. Hi, Steve. I wanted to talk to you today about the role of the scientist as a communicator. And the reason I'm talking about that is the inaugural address of President Obama, followed by his presentation at the National Academies of Science. He talked about restoring science to its rightful place. And I'm trying to find out by asking a number of smart people what we think those coordinates are. Where is the rightful place? What is the rightful place?
Well, I think the rightful place of science is not as just another interest group or another constituency, some kind of priesthood of people who portray themselves as doing something fundamentally different from what journalists or intelligent, responsible people do. Science, in my view, is just continuous with knowledge, with rationality, with trying to figure out how the world works. Science concentrates on some aspects of reality, tries to achieve knowledge about it that's as solid as possible, but ultimately what science does is not different from what anyone else should be doing, including politicians, namely trying to figure out what kind of world we live in, what makes it tick, and make decisions based on our best understanding of the kind of world that we live in. So a real failure of understanding, and I don't know which side is to blame, that struck me was some congressional testimony in which scientists were talking about global warming, and a congressman said, "Oh, that's the kind of thing that you scientists always say." Now, something went deeply wrong in terms of the role of science in public discourse for him to blow off scientists as just another interest group. Because assuming that these scientists were doing their jobs halfway right, assuming that they were decent as opposed to awful scientists, what they were doing was presenting our species' best understanding of the world that we live in. Maybe they weren't communicating that. Maybe they were putting on white coats and disguising themselves as some kind of privileged oracle or priest. Maybe this congressman was just out of touch with what science is. But that's the problem that I hope that President Obama pointed toward a solution to.
Okay, so on the one hand, you were saying that we shouldn't be, scientists should not be a separate kind of group, not a priesthood. They should be doing the same job as everybody else in society. On the other hand, you just also said that they are practitioners of a craft which delivers a kind of privileged information. Well, the facts of the matter, right?
It oughtn't to be privileged in that you kind of hope that that's what journalists are interested in, what politicians are interested in, and you can't run a country based on false premises. Otherwise, the effects of your policies will be the opposite of what you hope them to be. And ordinary citizens, we all want to know what's true and what's false, how things work, not how they don't work. I think that scientists, in order to reinforce that that's what science is all about, should, whenever they can, try to retrace the inferential steps that lead them to their conclusions. Not just we have announced, or it's a consensus among scientists, that the world is getting warmer and it's the fault of burning too many carbon fuels, but why that is compelling. What is the kind of evidence that leads a scientist to that conclusion, so that people will see that this isn't just one voice, it isn't just two sides in a he said, she said debate, but that there were reasons that led the scientists to their conclusions, reasons that any intelligent person could reconstruct, at least in broad outline, to be persuaded or convinced.
Okay, so there was a report recently which I mentioned to you that came out, I think, in July or something, by the Pew organization, a poll that they did. And usually these polls go and talk to the public and find out what the public knows, what it doesn't know. In this particular instance, they actually asked, did a public survey. They also surveyed, in collaboration with the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the AAAS, Publishers of Science, they also surveyed some scientists as well. And the headline here says, "Public praises science, scientists fault public and media." And that's basically the case, that public love science, got the usual things wrong, about the sun going around the earth and all those sorts of things. But the scientists were pretty demeaning, to be honest, about public's understanding of so on. And I think Alan Leshner, at the end, the CEO of the AAAS, said that one cannot just exhort. We all agree you should agree with us. It's much more interactive process that's involved. It's time-consuming, can be tedious, but it's very important. But there is obviously this disconnect.
I wonder how much of that is specific to the United States, and in particular specific to the public's reception of the theory of evolution. That has become such
and this is a poll, of course, in the 200th anniversary year of Darwin's.
Yeah, that's right.
So, sorry to interrupt.
So that's the issue in which the American public deviates the most from the populations of other industrialized countries, and also the one in which there's the sharpest disagreement, I suspect, with scientists. I think for reasons, many scientists diagnose this as a problem of scientific literacy, that if only people were better educated about the facts, they would not be misled by creationist pseudoscience. There may be something to that, although I suspect that the deeper problem is that people have moralized the issue, that a belief in creation people equate with either an allegiance to some kind of community that you grew up with, that you want to feel solidarity with, or even a code word for are you basically amoral, or do you believe that life is guided by moral values? And they blend the morality with the science. And I think that's what drives a lot of the hostility towards evolution in this country.
Yeah, just looking at one of the problems for science. Scientists' views of problems for science. Number one, public does not know very much about science. Major problem, 85%.
Mm-hmm.
So if the public doesn't know very much about science, whose burden is that? Let's not say whose fault is it. Let's say whose burden is it, whose challenge is it? And I think about this book just out by Randy Olson, who did the book, the movie Flock of Dodos. Its title is "Don't Be Such a Scientist," and its basic theme is, and he was a scientist, of course, and that became a filmmaker. That is there some way of conveying the information without being so geeky and condescending?
Well, certainly condescension is a problem. Is geekiness a problem? Maybe people like their scientists to be geeky.
Geeky's in at the moment.
There's a certain chic to that, and I don't know if people necessarily want scientists to be hipsters, or even worse, faux hipsters.
So let's go with geek chic, but let's deal with the condescending part. So.
Yeah, the condescension is definitely. Not only is it not is it a losing PR strategy, but in some cases it may be wrong scientifically as a misdiagnosis of why people reject the lessons of science. It may not always be through scientific ignorance, but it may be because of the fusion in people's minds of certain scientific hypotheses with certain moral precepts. Because, to be honest, there's a psychologist named Andrew Stolman who did a thesis in this department where he tried to assess the understanding of evolution among people who believed in the theory of evolution, good guys like our buddies, and found that the majority of people who were pro-Darwinian systematically misunderstood the theory. You give them questions as to how does Darwin's theory work, they give you the wrong answer. Yeah. So it isn't just ignorance versus knowledge. It's also affiliation with certain groups, and in a sense, it's an extension of the culture wars, the red state, blue state divide. And it would be, I think, shallow science on our part if we diagnose the problem as simply due to not enough information. Although surely more information is better, and surely clearer information is better. In particular, not just flooding people with conclusions or hitting them over the head with what scientists believe, but retracing the inferential steps. That is, why are scientists so convinced that Darwin's theory is true? It's not because you have your God, we have our God, Darwin's our God. That would be the worst way to convey it. It's rather, well, let's look at the fossil record. Let's look at how birds get to islands. Let's look at DNA. Let's look at embryos. This is the case, this is the brief for evolution. It's interesting that only in the last year or two have we seen books that simply lay out the case, the evidential case for evolution. Jerry Coyne, Richard Dawkins, Eugenie Scott have all come out with books that actually lay out the case, something that in all these years of books on evolution